longest-running cases ever, I believe.
Jim's asking if you have an opinion on Bill Shooty.
Earl, we're talking about you.
Yeah, Earl, do you have an opinion on the man who was prosecuting you?
That wasn't Bill Shooty.
It's on. Oh, yeah.
That's a live mic.
It's hot.
Live mic.
So, I
Wasn't Bill Shooty? He's getting no credit for Bill Shooty.
would not like to discourage the momentum of this. There is a side of me that would like to tell Shooty that he could chew on a dead, uncircumcised penis. However, there's another side of me. There's another side of me that
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
I
Very
specific reference.
There we go.
But
I know exactly what we're talking about here.
But I will say there's another side. There's another side.
There's
of
another
me
side.
Look at
that
Zena.
wants to say, I'm trying to bless those who curse me and love those who hate me. I'm trying to do that.
What he's saying is,
But the uncircumcised penis is very tempting to tell him to eat. However, I do not want to discourage the theme of what you guys say. But I just want to say I'm working on the other side right now.
Hey, Jims, what's that theme that we say about Bill Shooty?
Fuck Bill Shooty.
That's right. Okay. Just wanted to remind everybody the theme.
That was good.
So, obviously, when we talk about a dispensary shutdown, this is a creation of the Snyder administration. The emergency rules were Snyder functions. The fact we had to kick the can down the road 3 months every single time in 2018, 4 different delays we saw. Remember when they originally wanted to shut down all dispensaries way back in September of 2017, not December, September of 2017. That's when they started talking about shutting them all down. Imagine what would have happened if that went down. At that point, with the Snyder administration, we'd have no outlook for success. We'd have no relief. The Attorney General, the Governor, the Legislature, nobody would help us. And at that point, it would have been a black market festival.
But who's helping us now, Rick? Jim and I were discussing this earlier. What is going on now? We're hearing Zippo, nothing.
It's the 10th of January.
Hey, Ed.
It's the 10th of January.
Exactly. It's the 10th of January.
Add to the pool of the cesspool of all the terrible things of why there's a problem right now. So as stated before, some things were mentioned. We have statutory language that recognized there would be a state of emergency of safe access, which I would include in that reasonable pricing, is cut off to patients. And the premise of that fear of not letting that state of emergency arise is the justification that let Lara break from all rules of a controlled system and let to go on random behavior that they wanted to shut down in September, did not shut it down, let it go on, turned the other cheek, looked away, knew what was going on. They tried to implement it, got extended, and then in their last act before they shut it down, they said, you know what? And I think it's quite significant. They decided to say, in a trick way, those applicants who are pending and open lawfully, who, if we knew, even though you already know, are getting marijuana from caregivers, and we might use that as a way to deny them their permit, we're going to state that we're not going to do that right now. Now, that doesn't mean that overages sold to dispensaries is legal, but we're not going to punish those facilities that are buying marijuana from caregivers and not hold that against them. So they say. And at that point in time, and this is like in September, October, we've been an entire year, and they decree this. They've gone 10, 11 months, and then we turn the corner at the end of the year. They shut that program down, and no facility has any cannabis. Now, there's 900 pending applications on the wall, pending. And they spent $20 million in legislative funds. They created 150 new jobs. People are on a payroll. They're getting paid. They're waiting to do their thing. The intention here was not to collect application fees and rip off the public, but to genuinely implement a tax and regulate system regarding medical cannabis so the state would profit or earn tax revenue from it.
But you're mischaracterizing the way that this whole thing went down. You're making it seem as if someone made a decision and he said, let's shut these things down. That's not at all what happened, Michael. They made permanent administrative rules. In the permanent administrative rules, there's no allowance for things like taking a caregiver over just because the legislature said they can't do that.
Yep.
Okay, this is not a decision that somebody was made. This is the way the rules were written by the legislature, and they're just putting them. And they're just putting them into play in the administrative rules. The emergency rules, which we continually won successes on over and over and over in 2018 to get bumped back over and over again, were never intended to be permanent. The question becomes not, should the admin rules allow caregiver sales? It can't. The question is, should we allow the emergency rules to expire? We shouldn't allow the emergency rules to expire, but we can't blame the admin rules that were put on. And the emergency rules expired because that's all JCAR approved the emergency rules for. JCAR is the Joint Committee on, I don't know, something. They approve all the language for all of the regulations. So in order for you to get things like administrative rules or emergency rules enacted, it has to first go through JCAR to make sure it's legal and the methodology utilized is correct. So this is a predictable end result of a progression of events that was not a surprise to anybody who's been paying attention. The only thing that's really disappointing is that licensing and regulatory affairs hasn't extended the emergency rules period.
Rick, I'm sorry.
Is the emergency over?
No, it's not. That's why it's disappointing.
Rick, what was it that how was I misleading? What was it that I mischaracterized? I'm just curious because
somebody made a decision at Lara, and somebody made a decision to shut this off, and somebody made a decision. It's not. This is just the rollout of the program. It's not someone making a decision to do that
there's
to people.
been administrative rules which have been in effect. In the creation of the administrative rules...
There have been emergency rules in effect, not administrative rules.
Didn't the same people create the new rules as the old ones?
In the intention of creating the administrative rules, they've been using the emergency rules...
But that doesn't mean that one person made a decision. Somebody didn't decide to fuck people over.
They made a decision to pass these rules but they made a decision to pass these rules at a time when the state was not ready to keep supply of cannabis to patients.
Rick,
they made that decision to pass the permanent rules instead of letting the emergency rules expire. That was a decision.
JCAR set the length of time for the emergency rules. The emergency rules only had until the end of December.
They had different time frames, and there's issues of whether they could be extended or not. And the variations of using the... Well, what's that? My point is this. That
who set the time?
JCAR, Joint Committee on whatever it is.
The point is, though, that the recommended the use of the emergency rules and the time frames of those are a tool for Lara, okay? And they're a tool that are in play to avoid a state of emergency. And when I say they, I'm saying the failure to utilize the emergency rules and push forward the use of the emergency rules to stop the state of emergency from happening is a legislative mandate. There's nothing that stops the duty of the government to prevent the legislative mandate when there's a statute that directs them to do that, all right?
But let's correct that, too, though. I don't think it's a legislative mandate because the legislative mandate would have been in the administration of the business facilities. I think this is an MMMA mandate. I think it's a mandate of the people,
Rick,
which should be
Rick,
even
have you
stronger
seen
than
Section 2? Are you speaking...
Yeah, because Section 2 says if this creates an emergency, then you have
say
an obligation.
If it does, it says we're using the emergency rules...
Right.
So to stop the state from being an emergency so patients can't get their cannabis. That is the legislative language. If we agree that that is not taking place, that patients don't have safe access, and I said, and that's the language.
And you know that I agree with that.
I know.
I'm in many publications saying that.
I know, and I don't think we're disagreeing. I was taking issue with how I characterized, and we may be arguing about the same thing. But my point is, I start this argument from the point of the legislature themselves. The original MMFLA Section 2 speaks about this world where patients can't get cannabis, and when that happens, they are to use the emergency rules so that to prevent people not being able to get their cannabis and to outlay the program so it can begin and licenses can be had. So when they and this is the best argument.
I think there's a mandate to protect safe patient access contained within the MMMA itself.
Fine. But the legislature now has written rules identifying a state of affairs where they've recognized that if patients don't get cannabis, it's a state of emergency. And thus comes the emergency rule. So my point is this. When the legislature did that, this is not a declaration, as the interpretation may have been, that caregivers can't be involved. It means that to prevent a state of emergency, they can use the emergency rules and are demanded to. And I'm saying what they did is they, for a period of time, looked away and let caregivers bring their overages or whatever was going on. And then when they learned that there's X amount of marijuana on site and where it came from, they said, we don't know what the rules are, and they let it go on. And that is...
They directly sanctioned it. They absolutely sanctioned caregiver overages.
I would... Okay, well, listen...
They proved us.
I would say, if I'm defending that, I would say yes. I was defending someone who was relying. I agree, but it's such a gray, bizarre area. But I would agree. This is the way that it worked out. This is the way that it rolled out. And we can talk about, the emergency rules expiring. We can talk about this, that. But what I'm saying is, the basis of my position is that the legislature in Section 2 said the emergency rules are to be used to stop a state of emergency, so that patients can, in the state of emergencies, if they can't get there. So now, wherever we are right now, whatever's going on right now, is just that we've stopped using the emergency rules. It did not stop the emergency. The emergency exists right now.
Right.
How can that happen when there's a mandate?
Because
This isn't even an emergency.
Because Lara doesn't believe it's an emergency. Lara believes 42 centers is sufficient to supply an X number of people in the state, and I disagree with that.
That's fine.
I
Then
disagree
that's the
with
debate. Then that's the debate of whether we're in a state of emergency. It's interesting. There's been some. This is a very interesting point because I know the national debate right now with the federal government closing is, can our president declare a national emergency because our government shut down and there's a border problem, so he says, and do whatever he wants? And you know what the answer is? He can. And you know what the definition of emergency is? There is none. Okay?
Whatever situation he identifies, right?
He proclaims it.
I know that, but there's no definition of what that might be. Which gives him
that's
no.
all he's got to do is proclaim
right. So
it.
anyway,
he's got no
but I'm
guardrails.
saying
He can do
in
whatever
the
he
state of
wants.
Michigan, there is a definition, oddly, of what a state of emergency looks like, and so a patient can't get their medicine. So the debate becomes over whether it is or is not. Now, I thought it was interesting that Lara's position. I like Lara. I don't badmouth Lara. I think I would blame the legislature more. I think we agree on that. And I really defend them most of the time. I think they're moving in the right direction.
They could have implemented in a much more friendly manner and been a lot less kowtowing to business interests and having stupid rules that seem to only benefit certain particular individuals. How Tom Shalani gets the first 4 stack licenses, that's something to be investigated. But anyway.
They stacked the board with law enforcement.
That wasn't their appointment, so that was the previous one. I mean, technically it's supposed to be bureaucrats. They're supposed to license people, and they're not the ones even making the decisions.
Yeah.
I don't blame them for a lot. But what I do, and they're not making decisions per se. They're bureaucrats for all purposes.
Well, the CBD decision, saying that you can't have CBD products in any of the MMFLA stores because CBD can only be derived from hemp and hemp's not available and stuff like that.
I don't know if that was from their brains, but I'm saying that may have been a thought that was created by the administration that surrounded them, and that's something to think about. That may have been their announcement.
They interpreted the Research Act in a way that was very narrow, very narrow-minded.
Exactly right. And that seems to me to be one of those areas in which they actually made a choice. They had a variety of things to choose, and you can point to that and say, bad doggy.
So, back to the discussion, and if Lara, I was going to say Lara's position, even though you would think that this would be the last thing they would say is, if patients really can't get their medicine, they should get a caregiver. Now, in the world of...
that's Don Bailey's line.
Well, in the world of... Well, I think that's a line that both sides of this debate would say. I think Don Bailey would say that. Obviously, Lara's saying that.
Only 96,000 patients had caregivers the last time they
there are people within our own community, Rick.
250,000.
There are people in our own community that would say that, right? Like, why would you need a dispensary? Why do you need a dispensary? Get a caregiver. Now, that may not be you get one of 5, you're one of 5 people, because that's always the problem. I mean, I am never going to knock the caregiver system. I support it 110%. I think caregivers that, I've been advocating, and this may be blasphemy also, but that the caregivers who want to should have access to the MMFLA. There may be different rules and oversight or something that goes with it, but why wouldn't they?
That's what we wanted
be first a step
with the local option bill. That's how we set it up.
Understood. But my point is that there are caregivers that say, "Why would I want to be part of that?" In all that. But And besides, there's been going on, that's always been the debate about legalizing and caregivers and whatnot. But I did realize this, and this is interesting. I think this is interesting. When you look at medical marijuana, look at